Hey everyone, this is my no BS meta guide to Bulwark. There's going to be chapters in this video, so you can skip around to whatever you like. We're going to start with the skill tree, and then move on to weapons. For the skill tree, I'm going to be going column to column, going top to bottom, telling you which perks are good, which perks are bad, and what synergies they have. Anyway, let's get right into it. First off, something I quickly want to mention is that every class in this game has a passive ability, starting perk, whatever it's called. I forgot to mention this in my assault guide, but for Bulwark, you get a 20% health increase. It's one of the best in the game. It's just a very nice, flat health increase. Now let's start with Conviction. Conviction is just a really good perk and very solid. Most of the perks in this column are pretty stacked, and it's a pretty hard choice to choose most of the time. But Conviction is a very consistent and reliable perk. When your armor is fully depleted, you take 25% less health damage. Basically anything you'd want out of a defensive perk. When your armor goes down, you're going to start taking health damage, and you take 25% less health damage. This perk has some insane synergy with other damage resist perks we'll get into later. But yeah, not really much to say about it right now. Really good perk. You can't go wrong with taking this build, taking this perk. Now for Intimidating Aura, even though this thing seemed to have gotten nerfed in patch 6.0, it actually got a major buff. This thing does absolutely insane damage and can straight up just parry, gunstrike, and a Majoris is dead. It does insane damage now, and for the cost of a 5-second cooldown, I think it's really worth the trade, and this has made parry builds skyrocket into being absolutely insane on Bulwark, and they always kind of have been, because Bulwark is the parry class. This perk synergizes really well with basically just everything on Bulwark. It's just a really solid pickup, but obviously it synergizes super well with defensive advantage, since you create a shock area for 5 seconds, and that whole parry build. Now for forward momentum, I'm going to bundle forward momentum and Merciless Resolve into the same thing. I know I said I was going to go column by column, but these perks are basically the same, and they also have something in common. They're both bugged. They currently don't give you the melee damage that they say, or they don't give you any at all. It's really hard to test, but the best way to test it that I found is to test it with Power Fist, as if it was giving a 45% melee increase, it should be one-shotting Majoris, similar to the one-shot build on Assault. Um, Now, just as a prerequisite, in case these get fixed, these perks are pretty good, as you can basically make a budget one-shot build with Power Fist and Assault. 45% melee damage is a lot, as long as you can get over the clunk of Shield Bash. Personally, I don't really like Shield Bashing for damage, but I know some people are fine with it, and if you are, I think this combo of perks is really good. On their own, I think they're okay. I think this one is definitely better on their own, but it has really fierce competition with Intimidating Aura and Conviction. So yeah, personally right now, I would avoid these perks. They just don't work. But when they get fixed, I definitely think they are worth a try, especially if you want to do a one-shot Power Fist build. Now for Armor of Contempt, Armor of Contempt, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it here, is just a really bad perk. The best thing that this is good at is killing Minoris enemies. It does tickle damage to Majoris, although it does have a really weird and quirky interaction in co-op, where if you are blocking, your teammates can actually shoot you and proc the perk's effect. You don't need enemies to proc the effect. Any ranged attack will proc the effect, including from your allies. So if you want to run this as a meme build with your friends in co-op, go for it, but meta-wise, it's really, really bad, and there's better perks in this column. Now for Shock and Awe, I think Shock and Awe is basically only worth taking if you are taking defensive advantage, which I'll get into in a little bit, but other than that, not really much to talk about. If you're taking defensive advantage, really good perk, just adds 25% more damage to this perk, and any shock grenades you find, and also enemies in it just take 25% more damage in general. So yeah, if you're not taking defensive advantage, I would probably not take this perk. It's not very good, as you're basically conditioning yourself to find shock grenades in the map in order to get value out of it. Um, and I think the next perk is just better if you're not running defensive advantage. So yeah, it's a synergy perk. Not really good on its own, really good with certain perks. Now for scramble targeting is, I think, just the best all-around perk in this column if you're not taking defensive advantage and shock and awe as a combo. If you're not taking defensive advantage, I would basically always go scramble targeting. It's just a net positive, 25% less range damage from enemies while you're surrounded by other enemies. It's okay, it can be a little inconsistent sometimes, but this column really only has a perk for synergy between these two and just a not great perk in armor and pretend. So this is basically an auto default if I'm not running defensive advantage. And this is also really good with the damage resist build, which I will get into at the end of the video when I talk about Bulwark's best builds. Now for defensive advantage, this perk is really good. I don't think I really need to say much about it. Um, this perk, unlike Intimidating Aura, can be used with block weapons, so that's really nice. But I would say it's best used on parry and block weapons. I was gonna say it's best used on parry weapons, but it's really good on both. Basically, being able to spawn a shock grenade every 30 seconds is really good, and it just absolutely clears all Minoris and does really good damage to Majoris. Um, and it synergizes super well with Intimidating Aura, as you proc both of these usually when you parry. This usually deals with Minoris, this usually deals with Majoris, and yeah, that's a really strong build. So, but yeah, defensive advantage, like I said, it works with shock and awe. Really good perk. It's just a shock grenade every 30 seconds on perfect block or parry. Anyway, I'm gonna go on to the next one, because not much to talk about on this one. Now for Steel Within, this perk is super slept on in my opinion. Uh, when your health is less than 50%, you take 30% less health damage, and if you stack it with a lot of other damage resists, like Conviction, and with a certain perk on Power Fist, you can basically become unkillable at 30% or lower health. I know it sounds risky, but there is a mechanic in this game where when you get low health, you get more damage resist. And this synergizes super well with all these perks combined. You can get some ridiculous numbers on damage resist with these perks, and yeah, this is just a really good perk in this column. People sleep on it, and it makes Bulwark insanely tanky. Like, if you want to feel like a tank, do this damage resist build that I'm gonna explain later. Armor reinforcement, like I said in the assault guide, this perk is just insanely good. It's insanely consistent. Non-finisher gun strikes restore 1 armor segment. This perk synergizes really well with Intimidating Aura, since you're going to be running a parry weapon with that and getting a lot of gun strikes, so you'll have a lot of armor coming in. The only thing I really have to say about this is that it is still bugged on certain Terminus enemies, I'm pretty sure, and still gives you 3 armor pips on a certain Tyrannid Terminus enemies. But that's about it for armor reinforcement. Really simple perk, very strong though. Most of this column is very stacked. Now onto the team perks, and to start this, we're going to have Focus Restoration. This perk, in my opinion, is just not that great. It's just really inconsistent. And even though, yes, your whole team does get the benefit of this perk is basically just a worse version of armor reinforcement. And realistically, is every 40 seconds getting 1 armor segment that good? You get armor from pretty much doing anything in this game. You get it from executions, you get it from gunstrike finishers, you can get it from sitting out of combat for a bit, you can get it from killing enough enemies and not being a hit. You can get it from armor boosts from crates, which are the most common drop from crates. And I feel like I can speak for most people when you have a Bulwark on your team with this, which I've never seen a Bulwark run this perk even after its rework. You just kind of sit there when you get that 1 armor segment and you're like, ah, that's nice, but I wish they had advanced conditioning, which, speaking of which, advanced conditioning. This perk is the best team perk in the game, and it's not even a competition. This perk is disgusting. It basically halves the drain of your contested health, and essentially when you have a Bulwark on the team, think of it this way, it makes your survivability go up by 50%. Easily, I don't even think it's a competition right now that this is the best team perk in the game. It does something constantly 24/7. It doesn't have a condition or a timer like Focused Restoration. It just works. It always works. And yeah, again, very simple perk, but that's all it needs to be. It just works really well and does its job extremely well, and that's why it's just the best team perk in the game. Now for effective formation, this perk is basically just worse in every way to advanced conditioning, in my opinion. 20% less health damage sounds good on paper until you read what's below it from extremis and terminus level enemies only. These are some of the least common enemies in the game, and yes, they do hurt. I can guarantee you would get more value from advanced conditioning if you get hit by one of these enemies because you can get up, shoot them, and get most of your health back after that. The only thing I could see this perk being good for is if you're running this full damage resist build I have here, and you want to stack even more damage resist. But the thing is, if you're doing that, you're kind of defeating the point of a team perk. You're not giving it to your teammates, and in general, I still even think then advanced conditioning is still better. And also when I say you're not giving it to your teammates, it's not giving as much value to your teammates as it is to you. So yeah, personally, both of these team perks are in a void unless you're trying to have fun and use something different other than advanced conditioning. But if you're trying to be as optimal as possible, advanced conditioning is just clears all of the team perks in the game by a mile. Now for purity of purpose, this perk is crazy after the patch. Uh, Again, it is basically an on-demand shock grenade when you pop your banner that lasts insanely long. Like, it lasts so long because banner lasts about 20 seconds, I'm pretty sure. I could be wrong on that. Somebody can correct me on that. I haven't really timed it, if I'm being honest. But it's around 20 seconds, I'm pretty sure. And this perk, when you place banner down, will basically kill every Minoris around you really quick, and it'll also do a ton of damage to everything else, other than probably Terminus enemies. But again, just having a banner to be placed where it just kills all the Minoris around it is really, really strong, and does quite a bit of damage to Majoris. Like, it can basically 100 to 0 every Majoris in the game if they stand in the banner for the entire time. I personally think this is best in slot, but there is another perk that it's competing with that is also very good, but I think the longer banner is better with this perk. Next perk is Rapid Regeneration. This perk I think is really good. It restores your armor like insanely quick, and the banner lasting not as long isn't that big of an issue because you can't take Purity of Purpose anymore. Purity of Purpose pre-patch 6.0 is over here. Now it's over here. If you want armor to come back like almost instantly, you can take this perk. If you don't value the aura as much, personally, I value the aura way more. I think the regen on it normally is fine, but this perk is still very good and very, very viable. Um, and yeah, it's not much to say about it. It regens armor much faster than usual, and yeah, really good perk still. Now, for focus strength, most bash perks, other than these two once they get fixed, are not that great, and I'm going to bundle probably these two together again because there's not really too much to talk about with either one of these. Focus strength, shield bash knocks enemies back and makes them lose control for a longer period of time. Nice for Minoris, I guess, but other than that, it's just kind of meh. It can stagger Majoris, but if they enrage, they can't stagger anymore. Um, yeah, nothing really to talk about here. This is not a very good perk, especially with what it's competing with. And then for this column, especially for what it's competing with, these two perks completely overshadow this perk. But if you really do want to run this perk, it does have an interesting breakpoint where the ranged Termagants, or Hormagaunts, whatever they're called, the ranged Minoris for Tyranids, you can go up to them, one-shot bash them, and instantly execute them. That's the only thing that this perk is really good for. I'm not sure if it does the same thing for Chaos. I did not test that. It most likely does, but again, this perk is just not very strong because Shield Bash is very strong. Is not very strong. And what it's competing with in these two perks is nowhere near to what this perk does. Glorious Shield. All squad members within the banner's area of effect take 20% less range damage, and the banner lasts 20% longer. This is a good perk. If you are okay with running default banner over Invigorating Icon, which I'm going to talk about here in a second, I personally think default banner, even without Invigorating Icon, is a super, super strong ability, and this just makes it stronger. And it also synergizes really well with Purity of Purpose, because the banner lasts 20% longer, so you're going to get more value out of the damage over time. And the 20% less range damage is a nice little sprinkle on top for your normal banner. Other than that, very simple perk, not really much to talk about here. It also synergizes really well with Inspiration as you get a longer 20% damage bonus. Now for Invigorating Icon. I don't really have much to say about this perk. I think everybody knows what this perk does, but I will reiterate what it does by just reading the description. When the banner is activated, all squad members regain maximum contested health, but it recharges 100% slower. That second bit you can completely ignore. It's bugged this patch. It recharges the same as the normal banner does. Now for the first part of it, this thing basically gives you full health. I think everybody knows what Invigorating Icon does, like I said, so I want to go over basically ways of using it instead, because I see so many people being really stingy with their banners when they're running Invigorating Icon. The best tip I can give you when you're running Invigorating Icon is to get creative with your banners and use them more. Stop just using them for executes. Yes, you will get full health back, but sometimes it's nice to just get 30, 40, 50% of your health back just from shooting something. And even then, if you play your cards right, you can literally get all your health back without an execute. So, yeah. Best thing I can say, place it down, get a gun strike, etc. If you see a Minoris about to jump you, you can place it down and then grab the Minoris, get full health. Just stop being super stingy with Invigorating Icon and be more creative with it, is the best tip I can give for this perk. Yeah, like I said, I think everybody knows this perk is meta, but I wanted to get that off my chest, basically. So yeah, be more creative with banners, please, and use them more off cooldown. Now for the Res banner, Rejuvenating Effect. When banner is activated, it revives incapacitated squad members within its area of effect. I think this is good if you are not running Invigorating Icon and co-op. Invigorating Icon and Rejuvenating Effect have anti-synergy. Because basically how these perks work is they work the same. It is a when activated condition. And I could be wrong on this. I have not used Rejuvenating Effect since the launch of the game. They could have changed this. I haven't had anybody else to test this with yet, so somebody can correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. But last I remember, Invigorating Icon and Rejuvenating Effect have anti-synergy, as they both activate when you place it. And if you have both of these perks, let's say somebody is down, you place the banner to res them, they're not going to get full contested health from Invigorating Icon. Now, like I said, this could have been fixed. I haven't been able to test it yet. So if it has been, please let me know in the comments. I will probably update the pinned comment if it has. But I think Rejuvenating Effect is better if you're running default banner and not Invigorating Icon. It has much better synergy, especially if you're running, let's say, Rapid Regeneration. You can res somebody and then instantly get them up to max armor and put them into a nice safe space, along with Glorious Shield, which makes this last a little bit longer. But yeah, Invigorating Icon and Rejuvenating Effect have anti-synergy, at least, like I said. Last I remember, I have not gotten to test it this patch. So yeah, that's basically Rejuvenating Effect, very simple perk. Now for Inspiration, this perk is just good. 20% more damage while you're in the banner's area. You definitely get more value out of it if you're running the duration banner build here, running max duration, you get like 20, like I think with these two perks you get like 24 seconds of 20% more damage. Very solid, and it works really well with Invigorating Icon, especially because teammates within the banner are doing 20% more damage, so they are regaining 20% more contested health while they stay in the banner. Which is why I say to get more creative with your Invigorating Icons, because you can regain contested health from more than just finishers. Any damage you do that isn't from, let's say, equipment or environmental hazards will contribute to you getting contested health back. And the more damage you deal, the more contested health you get. So this perk synergizes really well with Invigorating Icon and even just normal banner. Now for the signature perks, I'm going to start off with this. All the signature perks are good. Bulwark does not have a single bad signature perk. There is definitely a worst one, but it is not bad by any means. So let's start with Emergency Countermeasure. Just solid, especially if you're running Defensive Advantage and Shock and Awe. You get even more shock to dip into. And it's nice for when your armor breaks, it'll just kill all the Minoris, do a lot of damage to the Majoris enemies. And pretty much everything I said about defensive advantage, but it's when your armor breaks. Solid, very good signature. Defensive Mastery. This perk, in my opinion, is probably the weakest of the three. And not because the effect itself is bad, but it's because its condition procs too much. You'd probably want to save this for Extremis level enemies to just instantly clap them with your parry or perfect block and just insta-kill them, but most of the time you're just going to proc it on Majoris, and you probably won't proc it on Extremis that much, because if you're playing the game correct, you're perfect parrying and perfect blocking everything, basically. But yeah, it's a very strong effect when it happens. It just insta-kills things. But the issue is that it's a 120-second cooldown, and it procs a Majoris, and you're fighting a lot of Majoris in this game, so you're probably only going to proc it on Majoris, which it's a strong effect, but there's better perks in this column, in my opinion. And speaking of which, Armored Advance. This perk, in my opinion, is Bulwark's best signature, and I think it's one of the best signatures in the game. If you have armor remaining, you do not lose control upon taking heavy hits, and you cannot be knocked back. I'm pretty sure everybody knows what this is. It's hyper armor, but I think it is the best effect of hyper armor in the game, as it's just basically always up. You're pretty much always going to have armor in this game. Armor is such an easy resource to obtain, and this effect is very strong. It will make it so you get stagger locked less, you can straight up tank certain attacks that you wouldn't normally, and one of the reasons this perk is super good and people don't understand the synergy with it is that it makes it so that you can straight up sit in front of a sniper and not stagger at all, as that counts as a heavy hit or just a normal stagger where you lose control. Same thing with zoanthropes, so you can literally sit there and just block those ranged attacks that would normally stagger you out of your shield. Very strong perk, especially with that block synergy. It's really nice to just sit there and stand in front of a zoanthrope and just tank it all. You take no damage to the block and won't stagger through it, so you don't even need to dodge those attacks. If a sniper is charging its shot at you and you have armor with this perk, you can literally just run at him, and he'll just shoot the shield and it'll do nothing to you other than give you a little bit of the vision debuff, but that's about it. Also, something to note, this perk can bug on occasion, where when you have armor, it won't proc. The easiest way to fix this is to get your armor stripped completely and regain your armor, and you regain the perk back. Anyway, now that we have Bulwark's skill tree done, I'm going to be going left to right on Bulwark's ranged weapons, and we're going to start with Bull Pistol. Bull Pistol is a really good ammo-efficient option for Bulwark. Since secondary is the only primary ranged weapons you have, it's good to have a very ammo-efficient secondary, so I don't think you can go wrong with Bolt Pistol, although it does kind of hit like a wet noodle sometimes. The variant I go with is the ammo variant, since this is effectively your primary, you want as much ammo as you can get. The other two aren't worth it in my opinion. and this is the build I always go with. Now for Plasma Pistol, Plasma is a really good weapon, but it comes across a lot of ammo issues. Hence why I recommend using Bolt Pistol if you really struggle with ammo on this thing. But I do have a build that will remedy that a lot. I have two builds for this thing. But for the variants, I only use the ammo variant. The other two, again, aren't really worth getting because you really need a lot of ammo since this is your primary ranged option. For the perk tree, this is the ammo efficient build I run, and this is the super fast charge time version I run. Although I personally don't run this very much anymore. I also almost forgot to say, Plasma Pistol is probably one of the best weapons for contested health regen, and it's not very good at taking down zoanthropes, but it's really good against everything else. And lastly, for Neo-Volkite, I know this weapon is a bit niche amongst the community, but I think this weapon is very good against Chaos, and I would highly recommend giving it a try against Chaos at the very least. I always run the ammo variant on this. Same story as the previous. You can't really risk taking the damage variant for less ammo. This is your primary ranged option, and this gives you basically no damage. So this is the perk tree I always run, and like I said, Neo-Volkite is mainly a chaos weapon, so I wouldn't really use this against Tyranids. I don't think it's very good against Tyranids, but I do think it is pretty damn good against chaos. And now on to Bulwark's melee weapons. Uh, Chainsword, one of the best and probably the most consistent melee weapon in the game. You really can't go wrong with a Chainsword ever. If you watch the Assault Guide, I'm going to be echoing basically the same things about Chainsword, but maybe slightly differently, as I do think Chainsword is much better on Bulwark than it is Assault. Now we're going to start with the block variant. This variant is... This and the Artificer variant are both insanely good. Both block chainswords are really good, and it is a feel thing, in my opinion. I personally like the speed of the Artificer chainsword, as the breakpoints are really similar, except from what I've noticed for bosses. I've definitely noticed that the Relic chainsword is much chunkier for bosses, but for everything else, I do think the Artificer chainsword has a faster TTK, as it only takes maybe one more hit than the Relic Chainsword, but it is much faster. But again, this is something I would encourage you to experiment with. These are both phenomenal options if you enjoy block. However, if you don't enjoy block, I would go with the fencing variant. Bulwark can basically make anything with a parry work, although I would definitely avoid the balanced variant as it's just not that great and the speed makes it feel terrible. Now onto the skill tree. I never change the skill tree, ever, even when I'm playing against Chaos. I always just take this path, because you can get momentum gain and full throttle. And like I said, in the Assault Guide, I'm going to have it again in this video, since we have Chainsword in this video. The reason we take full throttle is a bad perk. Full throttle is not that great. If you're using it how devs intended it, its use cases like in like 2 or 3 situations against certain bosses, but we use it to do a animation cancel called full throttle skipping. If you're more interested, I highly encourage you to learn this, and I will have a link in the description to full throttle skipping. I encourage you to learn this. It really makes Chainsword insanely good, and makes it so you can do one light attack and do a shoulder bash instantly instead of 2 light attacks and do a shoulder bash, or you can go with a 2 light into stomp, even though personally I think on Chainsword you should always spam the shoulder charge. Stomp isn't that great compared to shoulder charge. Shoulder charge is way better. Anyway, that's Chainsword. And now for Power Fist, which is what I personally believe to be the best melee in the entire game, and has some crazy good synergy with Bulwark, and with a lot of that damage resist build I was talking about. I'll get into that a little bit here, but I'm mostly going to dive into that at the end of the video with what I believe is the best builds for Bulwark. I'm going to just focus on Power Fist here. So we're going to start with the best variants for it. Nothing's really changed from Assault. The best variants, in my opinion, are the Balanced variant and the Artificer Block variant. I do think if you're running a parry build, you should run Balanced, but if you're not comfortable with balanced timings, you can run Fencing. You are going to lose out on some breakpoints with the Fist itself, but Fencing is safer than Balanced. And as for Block, Block is just insanely strong and insanely overpowered. If you Auspex scan a Neurothrope and then have 2 stacks of Block, you can straight up 2-shot Neurothropes with the right build. I'm not sure if you can do this on Bulwark. You can do it on Assault though. It's still insanely strong. And yeah, I would highly recommend giving Artificer Block Fist a try. And also, I said this in the Assault video, but speed does not affect charge time. And basically the only attack you're going to be using on Power Fist is its heavy charge up. And there is no difference between the charge up of the 1-speed Power Fist versus the 6-speed Power Fist. This is the perk tree I run. I basically never change it. This is just the best run to run, in my opinion. This is the perk tree I run. I basically never change it. This is just the best one to run, in my opinion. You can get both Chaos and Tyranid Slayer, and you pick up Focus and Tension, which has insanely good synergy with Bulwark and makes you almost unkillable while you are charging a fist at low health. This perk is crazy. And of course you always want to take Tide of Battle, as this perk description is bugged. The base range of Power Fist is 10 meters, and this perk doubles it to 20. Now, something I want to say about Power Fist, since I've seen a lot of people talk about this, Power Fist has a weird bug in certain areas where its range just gets completely neutered, and I don't know why. I think it's getting caught on something in the geometry, but your guess is best as mine. Hopefully Saber fixes this, because it'll just make Power Fist even more dominant than it already is. This is already the best melee weapon in the game, and it's amazing for Bulwark, especially making it very viable to play against Chaos. I also forgot to mention this while I was recording these bits in game, but I wanted to add this as a bit of a tip here for Power Fist, as I think it's really strong. With Power Fist, when the Neurothrope is about to land for its wave attack, you can actually punch the Neurothrope at a perfect time to instantly stun it, so it doesn't do wave attack, as you can see here. I just wanted to add that in really quick while I was editing. Anyway, back to the guide. And now last, but certainly least, we have Power Sword. This really hurts me to say, because I love Power Sword. It's such a fun weapon to use. But this thing is actually just a pool noodle. You are hitting Tyranids and Chaos with just a wet pool noodle with this thing. And I think this is the main reason melee gets such a bad rap in the community, as hitting really soft. This is one of the community's favorite melee weapons, but it is absolutely terrible in my opinion. If you don't parry at all, you definitely notice the fact that this thing does like no damage. Um, but it's a very fun weapon to use, and who am I to stop you to use it if you find it fun? I'm just here to tell you what's bad and what's good. I enjoy bad things, nothing wrong with that. Now, in my opinion, the best variant is Fencing, as you basically need the highest speed you can get on this weapon. It is a speed weapon. Um, this also has good damage, and the cleave stat doesn't really matter too much on Power Sword. Uh, you could use the balanced variant, but I think the speed cost is not worth it, especially with getting only like 1 strength and a little bit of cleave, which this weapon doesn't need cleave, by the way. And I would say to completely avoid both blocking variants. You can use them. I think this blocking variant is better than the Power Fist blocking variant, but it's still not great. And as for the Artificer one, I used this once, and it is absolutely terrible. The speed makes this thing completely unplayable, even though the damage stats are tempting on a block weapon. This thing needs like 6+ speed. It cannot go any lower than that. For the perk tree, this is basically the only thing I run. You can swap these two perks depending on what you prefer. If you prefer contested health on speed, or if you prefer contested health on power style. Um, but other than that, I don't have much to say for this weapon other than it's just really not great, but it is very fun. Okay, now for the build I've been basically hyping up for this entire video. I think it's one of the best builds in the game. It makes Bulwark an absolute tank and literally makes you too angry to die. This build is super fun, and I think it is probably Bulwark's best build right now. Although the parry build is still insanely good, like I think they're really neck and neck, but this build is crazy. So let's get into the perk tree first. This is the perk tree. We're taking as much damage resist as we can, all across the board, although we are not taking effective formation. You can take effective formation if you want, but I just think advanced conditioning is better. Purity of purpose, invigorating icon, but you can also stack even more damage resist with glorious shield, but invigorating icon is definitely just better because you can kind of hover around that 30% health threshold, which is around where you want to be at with this build. You're kind of redlining your health, but you will notice how tanky you are. And then we're taking inspiration, of course, and we're taking armored advance. But if you want, another perk that's really good with it is you can take emergency countermeasure, and you could probably get maybe shock and awe, but I don't think you need it. I would rather just go with the damage resist. And because one of the big things of this build is you're probably going to be getting one armor and losing it a lot to keep proccing conviction. And that synergizes really well with emergency countermeasure, since you're going to be breaking your armor a lot in this build. Like, you will not have armor a lot in this build, but you will be very, very tanky with your health. I personally think Armored Advance is just insanely good to not having the stagger and stuff, and being able to just run at snipers or sit there and block in front of zone thropes is super good. If you want to, you can take Defensive Mastery. I'm personally not a fan of this perk. And then here, you can also take Rapid Regeneration instead of Purity of Purpose. But that is about it for what I would sub for this build. This is, in my opinion, the most optimal version of this build. But you can swap these two, depending on which one you like more. I'm still playing around with it, but I still really like Armored Advance. Um, yeah. Okay, so for your ranged weapons, it's personal preference completely, but I personally recommend for your melee, it kind of dictates it a lot. So I run Power Fist with this build because the synergy it has with a certain perk in this build, because we are just stacking DR. The entire goal of this build is we are stacking as much damage resist as we can so that we can sit there and tank basically any attack in the game. And Plasma Pistol is really good with Power Fist because Power Fist is basically an infinite ammo ranged weapon right now. And Plasma has ammo issues, and that is basically completely remedied with Power Fist. This is the build I run with it. I always run the ammo efficiency build, but if you want, you can dip up here instead and get the extra charge time. I personally just always go with the extra ammo though, because it is more worth it in my opinion. Um, Now for the weapons, melee weapons, you can use basically any melee weapon. You can use Chainsword, Power Fist, or you can use Power Sword, but I would highly recommend against it. Power Sword really crutches on the parry build, which I'm going to be covering after this one. It's much better in that because the weapon itself is really bad. um, so yeah, I'm not going to talk about this one too much. You can use it in this build, but Power Fist is the GOAT for this. Chainsword is also really good. You can run a block Chainsword. I wouldn't recommend running a fencing Chainsword. I would run either of the block variants. This is very good with this build still. But we're going to go to what I think is the best option for this build, is Power Fist, because of this perk, Focused Intent. And this is why we want to stay at around 30% HP, because you take 50% less health damage while preparing a heavy attack. that is basically your entire game plan with Power Fist is you're sitting there and preparing heavy attacks. Uh, and the amount of damage resist you're stacking with this build is crazy. So for example, just from these two perks, we're getting a 55% damage reduction when they're both procced. And then we're getting a 50% from this when it's procced. Now, you might be saying, but that's 100% damage resist, so we shouldn't be taking any damage. Most games calculate their damage by having damage resist rather, by having diminishing returns, so you can never hit 100% damage resist. I do believe Space Marine has it, but it is very, very forgiving. Something to note as well with this build, and another reason why it's so good, Space Marine has a base mechanic where you take less damage and get more health damage resistance the lower HP you are, stacking even more damage resist with this build. We are just stacking as much damage resist as we can, which is why we want to play at low health, and we basically use Invigorating Icon to just kind of hover around that 30%-ish area. You don't want to ever full heal with this build. It's actually kind of counterintuitive to do so, as you are literally tankier when you have low health. Um, but yeah, this build is crazy. I don't change it between Chaos or Tyranids. It's kind of just the same for me. So I don't have a Chaos version of the build to show you or a Tyranid build of this to show you. It's just, this is the build. Play it against anything you want. It's super good and it's super fun. You literally become what you think a Bulwark would be, which is just an absolute tank. And I think this is genuinely one of the best builds in the game right now, and shows that Bulwark is genuinely insane this patch. And I can't put it into words how good this build is. But yeah, now onto the parry build. Now for the parry build, this is probably going to be a little bit shorter than the last one. I feel like most people are pretty familiar with the parry build. You take Intimidating Aura, you take Shock and Awe, and you take Defensive Advantage. But if you really want to, you can take, this build is very flexible, so like you can take Armor Reinforcements, you're going to get a lot of parries with this build, and more parries means more gun strikes, means more armor. And then for middle column, you probably want to go Scramble Targeting if you're going to do that. But I personally am comfortable with just having Defensive Advantage and Intimidating Aura. I think it's enough. You're going to be killing things so fast with this build. I don't even think you need Armor Reinforcement with this. Although I will say this is more of a Tyranid build than a Chaos build. I don't think it's very good against Chaos, as Chaos don't do melee attacks on you very much. Um, Obviously, you're running Advanced Conditioning. For here, you can run either one of these two perks. It is a personal preference here. Again, Invigorating Icon is probably the best in slot here, but if you don't want to run Invigorating Icon and just want to run normal Banner, you can run Glorious Shield. Also, just solid perk with this build. And if you're running Glorious Shield, you can run Res Banner if you're playing co-op. But like I said, I don't recommend running Invigorating Icon and Res Banner together. But most of the time, I would just take Inspiration. 20% more damage is free. And Armored Advance, I think, is just best in slot here. But again, you can also run Emergency Countermeasure since we're picking up shock perks, if you so please. And like I've said before, you can run this perk. It's not bad, but I personally just don't like it because it only procs on Majoris. You basically will never proc it on an Extremis because you're parrying it. You're parrying Majoris most of the time. Although I will say, I haven't mentioned this throughout the video, and I probably should have, this perk is better against Chaos, because Chaos, you don't have to parry as much. Anyway, for your weapon, you can basically use any parry weapon. It doesn't matter. You can use, even though I don't recommend it, you can use Balanced Chainsword, you can use Fencing Chainsword, you could use this thing if you want to. It doesn't matter, as long as it has a parry, it's good. I think Balanced Fist is the best because you get a parry, and I just think Fist is the best weapon for this class. But if you want to spice things up and just have fun with Power Sword, I don't blame you. Power Sword is still really good because, again, you're mostly just trying to get things to hit you, to parry, to gunstrike, to kill them. Um, but yeah, I don't really need to go too in-depth on the melee weapons. It's just as long as you have something that can parry, you are good with this build. Um, Now for your ranged weapon, again, this is personal preference, although if you're using Power Fist, I just use Plasma Pistol because Power Fist really helps your ammo efficiency. But if you're using like Chainsword, I would probably say to use like Bolt Pistol or Neo-Volkite, whichever one you're more interested in, since they have a much better ammo economy for when you have to deal with like Zoanthropes or Enlightened Zangors. But yeah, this build is pretty simple. Your whole game plan is to just sit there and parry, but it's very, very strong and does a lot of damage. And has fantastic horde clear with a defensive advantage and purity of purpose. So yeah, this is what I believe the second best build for Bulwark is. I don't think it's too far behind the damage reduction build, um, but I think the damage reduction build is better at the end of the day. So yeah, um, that's the parry build. Alright, that is the end of the Bulwark guide. Um, I really hope you learned something new from this video, and hopefully you learned Bulwark has not been nerfed into the ground. This class is still very, very strong right now, and is not just the co-op class. Um, if you made it to the end of the video, you're an absolute goat for watching this long, and like I said, I really hope you learned something new from this video. Um, yeah, I don't really have anything else to say other than thank you for watching to the end, and I hope you have a wonderful day.